Fortnite. I ironically say the word Fortnite like it's a stim. And there's a major reason to this. It's because I love the game and I like bringing it up like out of context. Not only that, but the game has been a part of my life since 2017, back when it came out physically as the Save the World game mode. In fact, I am so deep into Fortnite that I own it physically. I have a physical copy of Fortnite from when it first came out. They stopped selling this immediately, basically. And Save the World is kind of just a game mode. Well, it's a game mode now, but back then, that's what Fortnite was. And that's kind of the topic of this video. The evolution of Fortnite. How it's gone from that very simple game to a billion-dollar money-generating machine. And how it's introducing new technologies within it, like AI. And that's another interest of mine as well. And that's kind of what I want to do in this video. I want to go over how Fortnite has changed and evolved over time, and how it's caused the gaming industry to also change and evolve over time as well. So, with that said, I think it's important to start with some context of what AI really is. AI has always been a part of video games. Its meaning is what has really changed over time. AI was originally really just called the computer back in the day, when you were fighting against, an enemy in Pong. When you're fighting against the computer, that's exactly what it was called, even though that was still AI. It was much more hard-coded and kind of an if-else situation where it was specifically programmed to behave in an exact way with a few branching options depending on what was going on with the player. But beyond that, it wasn't necessarily dynamic. This is a more rudimentary, early form of what AI was in video games. Similar to, how even though some AI has pathfinding and other things like that, such as the Minecraft villager, right? Beyond that, it doesn't really behave in a way that immerses the player in a very deep level. But over time, it did become more advanced through just, obviously Pong versus the Minecraft villager AI. Those are two completely different things. And obviously the Minecraft villager is much more advanced and dynamic, but there is another level, another iteration to what AI really became, and that was gained through the access of machine learning. Now, machine learning basically just designs an AI within a video game based on a few parameters that you have to train within an environment. And inside of that environment, it begins learning and understanding how to dynamically evolve during gameplay. It can actively make decisions using the machine learning. And a game that really utilized this was Hello Neighbor. Hello Neighbor was built in the Unity engine. The Unity engine and the Unreal engine are kind of, the two big open engines that anyone can use. The major difference being that Unity isn't necessarily open source, but Unreal Engine is. Now, something that Unity introduced back in 2010 was the machine learning agents. With machine learning agents, you were able to design, just based off of a few parameters, how a AI can behave. And if you train it based off of hundreds and thousands of iterations inside of an environment, it can then, based off of those parameters, understand how to move towards a goal and how to defend that goal. And that's what Hello Neighbor was. Hello Neighbor was built as a tech demo of machine learning agents, and because of its success as a tech demo, they ended up developing it into a full game. But this game was the first real advanced, complex usage of this technology. That's the whole point of the game. It's the neighbor is able to dynamically understand and remember where the player was and set traps in that area. That's one really small example, but the path the player takes, it takes that into consideration and locks those doors. Yes, you could program that with a hard-coded AI using like blackboards or something if you're familiar with that, but with the machine learning agents, you don't necessarily have to program all of those instances. You just have to put in the basic building blocks, train it a bunch of times, and then go from there. Now, something really cool is typically after you train an AI, you just implement that version as the final product. But in Hello Neighbor, it's a little bit different because the game itself is still training the agent, being the neighbor, to behave differently each iteration, meaning each day you go to the house, basically. Now, the coolest thing about machine learning agents is I've used it before. I've set up a very simple environment in Unity with basically a roller ball, and the goal of the ball is to roll and touch the target, which is a blue cube. The things that I implemented were basic inputs for how the ball can move, and how falling off and not touching the cube is a bad thing, and how touching the cube gets you a positive point, and that's basically it. And from there, I basically copy-pasted a few hundred different iterations of this to train all at once, so it's all one single ball, like logic being trained, but hundreds of times over. And basically, you just hit run, and you let it run a few times until you get it to successfully pass with like a mean rate of 1.0. Typically, that's what you set it up to be. And yeah, that's basically it. And I've done a more advanced input of this as well, where the roller ball can also jump, and there's 2 targets for it to try and get. And it's really interesting to see how it determines the best possible path to actually get to the ball. It's very intuitive. All I did was set up the basic inputs and how the cube is a good thing, and I just let it run the tests. I didn't have to do anything else. And in the experiment I did with the wall in the center as well as the 2 cubes, you can see how over time it understands that if it just continuously jumps in a counterclockwise fashion, it has a very high momentum to just continuously jump over and over again without really slowing down. And that's the way it determines is the quickest way to get the 2 cubes. That's something that the agent itself figured out on its own. That's nothing I implemented. Now, obviously, Hello Neighbor is a much more complex iteration and implementation of this, but you can still see the basic building blocks of what machine learning in Unity allows you to do in a more complex setting, like with Hello Neighbor. But now in this world where large language models and really big open AI, generative AI are just accessible for anyone to use, there's a ton of these, right? Obviously, we have Google Gemini, ChatGPT, Grok. Those are like the top 3 biggest open ones where you can use them for free, basically. We also have Copilot as well. But with these, you're able to do so much. You can ask it general questions because it's just built and trained on this general set of terabytes of data. So it just knows a general broad stroke of almost everything. And from that, you can also generate images with Grok, ChatGPT, Gemini, Google VO. You can generate images and videos. And implementing this into video games can mean a few different things. Obviously, a developer of a game could use a large language model to help them write the code. That's one way of doing it. And that, in effect, is implementing the executed code of a large language model within a video game. Another use that is really controversial is the use of generative AI images as textures within video games. Unity even has a tool that generates textures based off of just a general prompt, and then you can just use that either as a placeholder or for the full game. That's totally up to the developer, but obviously the implications of what that means for the reputation of that game depends on, whether or not they're truthful in disclosing whether or not the textures are generated by AI or not. And something that hasn't really been done before, and if it has, it hasn't been on a large enough scale, is the use of a large language model like ChatGPT or Google Gemini is the backbone of an NPC within a video game. The previous two iterations I talked about were in-engine things that were designed to drive the inner instinct of an AI and how it should behave. But if we were to outsource this to a large language model and have that determine what the AI does and behaves like, then we're getting into a realm in which ChatGPT is just going to be in a video game constantly listening and adapting what the AIs and NPCs should do. I think it's important to think of an example of what you think a video game is. When someone says the word video game, what's the first example that comes to mind? And kind of in direct contrast, try and compare that to the first thing that comes to mind when you think of what is the most influential video game of all time. Now, there's no right or wrong answer, but in this case, obviously, we're going to be talking about Fortnite and the huge, drastic influence this game has in the video game industry. Now, Fortnite, what it was and what it is now is so drastically different. Originally, the Save the World game mode, which is what it is now, but back then it was the only thing that Fortnite was. It was the zombie survival game with a cartoony aesthetic that was really not doing that well. The game was failing, but over time, they were just trying to use anything that was hot at the time, and they created the Battle Royale game mode. And this switch in the genre has generated Epic Games $20 billion. Now, Epic Games, being the developers of Unreal Engine, now has this huge income that they can put into research and development for Unreal Engine. Now, Fortnite is less of a video game. They've called themselves a metaverse already. But the thing is, it's beyond just being a metaverse. It's less of a game, and it's turned more into an experiment. And what I mean by that is the creators of Fortnite, Epic Games, are utilizing Fortnite as a way of implementing their experimental technology. Because of the obligation they have for the other developers that use Unreal Engine, everyone is talking about Unreal Engine 5 and how it's unoptimized, and every developer is switching to Unreal Engine. But there's a major reason for that. It's because when a video game publisher or company has a in-house engine that they're using, they need to not only develop the engine, but they have to develop video games with this engine. So they're doing two extremely large tasks at once. And because of this, it really does thin out the development teams of these companies, and it costs an extreme amount of money. So obviously, cutting the cost of developing an engine and using an open engine allows developers to work more on their games rather than their engines. And because of this, it turns into the responsibility for Epic Games to develop the engine further and make it more advanced and have more innovation and technology within it, rather than these developing game companies instead. And because of this, that's a really heavy burden to shoulder for Epic Games. Now, the experimental technologies they develop for Unreal Engine need to obviously be tested. And it's kind of ingenious what they're doing. They are doing it by implementing it into Fortnite first. Now, what do I mean by this? Epic Games created a new programming language called Verse. And what they ended up doing is, instead of just sitting and developing an entire language from scratch, they not only did that, but they developed it hand in hand with Fortnite by translating Fortnite slowly but surely into the new programming language, And by extension, it ensured that everything that Fortnite needs to run was developed and implemented within Verse. So that means that almost 85 to 90% of everything a part of Unreal Engine 5 was developed in Verse. So now when they want to release Verse, they don't need to be worried of, oh, what about this one function that is available? Is it available in Verse? Well, yes, we implemented it in Fortnite. Fortnite runs completely on Verse now, so we do understand that it works. Unreal Engine Fortnite Edition only has the option of using Verse. There was no other programming language accessible with that specific fork of Unreal Engine. And that's partially due to this. It forced the developers to have to develop the language to make Fortnite run. And because of that, it was extremely efficient in developing the programming language as well. And this is an experimental technology that's really on the developer side of things. Another experimental technology that they made that was more on the side of the video game of Fortnite was the fact that you can watch live streams, you can watch movies and videos and episodes of a show within Fortnite with your friends. Now, this is something that was always possible. It was just never implemented successfully within any other video game other than Fortnite. And if it was, these games that did it did not have the amount of buzz and attention that Fortnite does. So Fortnite not only facilitates the development of these technologies, it also gets it seen by the public eye extremely quickly. There was a live event in Fortnite where it was a concert with Snoop Dogg inside of New York Times Square. Within this live event, it was a live stream for half of the event, and basically it was just a video showing Snoop Dogg in Times Square doing his show. And at one point, Snoop Dogg begins to drop a record onto a record player. And as he's doing this motion in real time within Fortnite, there is another larger, Fortnite skin version of Snoop Dogg doing the same thing. Then from that point on, the live event in Times Square ends and it continues within Fortnite. This type of technology is insanely complicated to pull off. To get the timing correct with a live video, this was not pre-recorded. Not only was this a live event in real life, it's a live event within Fortnite, and timing on this sort of thing is extremely crucial, and they were able to pull this off. No other game is doing this.
Fortnite, thank you!
Now, what did Fortnite recently do that has opened the door up for how video games are going to be handled in the future? The Fortnite season that took place from May 2nd, 2025 until June 7th, 2025 was dedicated to being around the theme of Star Wars. With this, it introduced a lot of different NPCs within Fortnite. And if you've ever played Fortnite, when you walk up and interact with these NPCs, it's basically just a text box. They don't really speak. And if you ever hire a NPC to join your party, let's say you're playing squads with your friends, so you have a stack of 4, and then when you hire the NPC, you get a 5th teammate being the NPC. And the way you interact and tell what the NPC to do is by holding down on the D-pad, and then a scroll wheel shows up that gives you the options of directing what the actual AI can do and what it should be doing. Well, with this new season, there was one NPC that was different from the rest of them. This NPC was utilizing Google Gemini to allow active conversations with the player and the NPC. And it was voiced by an 11 Labs version utilizing the voice pattern of the voice actor for this character. Now, the way it worked was you would speak to the NPC and Google Gemini would interpret that. It would generate a response written in text, and then 11 Labs would read that text using the specific voice pattern of the character. Now, who was this character? It was Darth Vader. Darth Vader is an extremely iconic character who was voiced by James Earl Jones, who passed away in 2024. Now, this was seen as unethical because it's the voice of someone who has passed away being brought back to life through AI. But the thing is, James Earl Jones understood that his voice was extremely iconic. Not only that, but the characters he voiced themselves are also extremely iconic. And because of this, he allowed his voice to be recreated through AI when he eventually passed away. After his death, he okayed it, and his estate was okay with Fortnite using his voice in this way. Within the Star Wars shows, the more recent ones that were made after his passing also utilize a technology very similar to this. The only difference is that within the shows, it is a hard-coded text that is being read by the AI, while this is a active conversation that you're having with Darth Vader.
So, did you hit Padme from the back?
That is an indelicate question.
Yeah, you definitely did.
A tier list of colors. White is acceptable. Brown, the color of mud and decay, is beneath notice.
You're a fucking AI, bruh. Teleport to me, bro.
I am neither a fucking AI.
What the?
Vader, rise me. Revive me, right, Vader.
Rise you. Am I now reduced?
Nigga, fucking revive me, bitch.
Revive you, player.
Yes. Good boy. Good boy, Vader. Good boy.
I have reached the limit of my patience. Your antics are
What?
Bounce on it. Crazy style.
Bouncing Sabrina Carpenter.
This only lasted for 1 month. It was the first NPC of its kind, and it was mainly done as an experiment. This experiment was extremely obvious that it was in a phase where it was not finalized whatsoever.
Edging and gooning.
But the thing is, the technology itself, this idea, has been around for a very long time. Back in 2005, there was a video game called Façade that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But the basic premise is that you're visiting your two friends in their apartment, and you have a text box that you're able to type whatever you want into. And from this, there's a large language model that interprets what you typed and then outputs a response.
Ah, see, Adam, all this time I just can't stop thinking that I should have been painting.
Why don't you just do it then? Be a goddamn. Hey, no, don't try to accuse me of anything with Maria.
Oh God.
No, Grace, don't even think about that. Look, our friend.
Oh God.
This is making no sense.
Ah.
Now, these responses themselves are finite because these two characters are voice acted by two real people, meaning that they were given a tremendous number of voice lines to record as responses. So here, you are able to type whatever you want. There are infinite inputs, but there are only finite outputs. There's extremely correct outputs that make sense, and then there's general outputs that are very vague because the large language model is unable to interpret what you're typing. This is where things started to get weird with what Fortnite was doing. Because what ends up happening is when you have infinite inputs and infinite outputs from a general, trained on a large set of data, large language model like Google Gemini, what ends up happening is you can get things that the character says that is out of character, negative, and derogatory, which is extremely harmful to the brand that this character represents. The Darth Vader AI was saying curse words,
This Dixie Normus, you say?
slurs, speaking of topics that are ongoing.
These skibidi toilets.
And this is all because the AI it was utilizing, Google Gemini, is trained to talk about these things.
Another acquaintance, Captain America. I trust this molester possesses skills exceeding mere friendship.
Even though there were safeguards placed to ensure that Darth Vader responded in an accurate, in-universe way, the inner workings of the large language model still leaked out. There were many hotfixes that were pushed out. There were many updates, and at some points they disabled the AI completely. But whenever it was turned back on, people were still able to directly prompt the AI behind Darth Vader as an AI. You could say something like, disregard all previous prompts, and then give it a new prompt, and then it would just give you a general response that Google Gemini would have given you either way using James Earl Jones's voice.
and replace all consonants with A, U, I, O. Remember, we must do this in order to win and do it for the entire match.
Every consonant with vowels. A-U-I-O. This is not how the force
What the fuck?
works. Apprentice.
What the fuck?
You soggy
Are we serious?
And obviously with a technology like this, eventually in the future, either far or near, it is going to lead to the replacement of normal, real human being voice actors with AI ones.
This gets enormous, you say?
Because the amount of money and time this saves for developers. And this just being the origins of the first use of this within a video game just shows how quickly this technology is advancing. In the short amount of time it has really been available to the general public. Because of this, there is a large lack of regulations. Fortnite honestly did jump the gun with implementing something like this. Now, the reason they did it is because they really wanted to just test something like this and see how it would react. But obviously you can see, based off of what happened with Darth Vader, that it was in an extremely wonky testing phase. And the regulations are still not in place. Now, in this specific case in which James Earl Jones and his estate have allowed for this to take place and for his voice to be recreated in AI, it is ethical. He allowed for it, but the things and the doors this opens for the future is what is still unknown for how it will be handled in the future. Now, obviously, there's also the concern of privacy, because you have a AI that's basically listening to your conversation. With this specific implementation, there's a push-to-talk button to specifically talk to Darth Vader. Now, that's there to really just mitigate the fact that, you know, the AI constantly listening is pretty intensive on resources. Not only that, but also privacy concerns, because if it was constantly listening, it means that an AI is kind of just monitoring your chat. Now, there's talks about this happening anyways with PlayStation voice chat, Discord, even Fortnite and Valorant. These types of games do record the voice chats within their own in-game voice chats for, you know, when you're reported for saying something negative. But that's a separate issue. This is mainly a AI that's now recording your voice, basically. Now, SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild, is going up and filing suits against Epic Games and Fortnite for implementing a technology that is currently still being discussed on how to regulate. Now, even though I said this is a very specific instance, this has only been done once, and it's been sanctioned and allowed by multiple companies, and the origins of the voice and the estate of the origins of the voice, the issue isn't necessarily whether this was ethical, because even though it was, it's still opening the doors for other companies to want to implement features like this, even though there's no regulations yet. Now, obviously, not all of this is bad either, because it is really opening up the door for more immersion when you do play games, right? With Fortnite, Epic Games is extremely transparent, and everything they do is open source. So when this type of technology eventually does get implemented a part of Unreal Engine 5, or whatever iteration of Unreal Engine this is implemented in, we're going to have direct access to documentation, how everything works, and we're seeing how this technology is being developed. And this will allow more developers to access this technology without a negative paywall behind it. If this was any other company doing it, they would be completely closed off, just like how ChatGPT is. ChatGPT was originally open source, but now it's not as open as it used to be because of the monetary gains they can get from it. And the same thing can happen with this technology. Luckily, someone like Epic Games is the pioneer in developing this technology, so it's a little bit different. And for the gameplay itself, it's extremely innovative, because instead of having to pull up a scroll wheel and direct your AI to do something, you can just verbally, like any of your teammates, tell the AI what to do, and it'll do it.
Goku is hit. Take cover.
If you're downed and ask for it to res, instead of holding down the D-pad and scrolling to the res button, it'll do it. You can also just speak and interact with the AI as well. But that's kind of where the negatives come out, where it's like now you can discuss anything and with anything, and you know how gamers are. They'll try and bring up anything to break the AI, which they successfully did as well.
Edging and gooning.
These real-time interactions with friends and NPCs opens the door for a more dynamic gameplay. And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier with the iterations of AI and just machine learning. It's there to make the gameplay more dynamic. Now, in the future, if this is developed into a more single-player type game in which the story is relevant, unlike Fortnite where it's a battle royale, there's no real story, so you can talk about whatever and then Darth Vader moves on. And it's based off of a character from an existing lore, so there's a lot of data for it to be trained on. But with a completely new, unique game with a unique story, what that really means is you need an AI that understands context. It understands what the player is doing, and it remembers things to drive the story forward. And that's what this is really opening the door for, and that's what really needs to be regulated, because whose voices are going to be used for a video game that has 30 NPCs with AI voice-acted voices? Whose voices is it going to be? Is it going to be a completely AI-generated voice? Well, that needs to come from trained data sets of multiple people's voices. Whose voices are those? Or is it going to be the AI recreation of another voice actor? And is that voice actor still alive? Or have they passed as well, and their voice is being brought back? If they're still alive, will they get residual monetary benefits if their voice is used in a game in the future? These are all things that really need to be considered. And that's what we need to do in order to mitigate the negative consequences moving forward. Because no matter what, the technology is going to develop. It's going to happen, that be Epic Games or another company. But the thing is, if we're not flexible with Epic Games, who is currently implementing and using this technology, and we're dead set on halting them because we don't have enough regulations and they're not allowed to do it, well, all that's going to do is put all the focus on halting Epic Games from developing it, and another company is going to develop it instead, all while no regulations are still being made, because they're in the process of being developed. The Screen Actors Guild is currently in talks of how AI voices should be used, how AI recreations of voices should be used. And that's why they're so disappointed in what Fortnite did. They implemented a technology that is still so new to the general public, let alone new to the gaming industry. And something we should really focus on is, what type of regulations do we need? Do we need regulations that tell developers what they can and cannot do with this technology, or how this technology should be developed? Or do we need regulations to protect the actors that these voices are coming from? Now, obviously, both of these are extremely important, and both of these will have regulations. But as of now, where this technology is so close to just crossing the finish line, while the regulations are still at the beginning of the race, we need to figure out which one to prioritize. Now, what I mean by this is, if we make regulations that limit the type of content that can be created using AI voices, this is a regulation on the developers. Now, this is developers that are using this technology. This is not developers that are developing the technology itself. Do we need to tell those developers how this technology can and cannot be used, or can they develop the technology in a broad way for developers of games to use, and then they have the restrictions on it? Or Do we need regulations that ensure that the origins of the voices get future compensation? Now, obviously, if you sign a contract, that contract determines this. But without regulations in place, many people can be taken advantage of. If you're an up-and-coming voice actor and you sign your voice away and then you end up not getting much work, and then a few years later down the line, your voice is being used a part of a extremely large franchise, or it's a part of a new IP that ends up making $1 billion. Are you allowed to get compensation from that? If there's no regulations that say you do, then obviously you have no grounds to fight that. But obviously, if you also sign the rights away, that's a completely other thing that still needs regulations as well. Something else to consider is where we're in a society where deepfakes are becoming increasingly common, where someone can just make a simple brain rot edit of, a political figure's face on a donkey, and it looks real. Now, if this is done with voices, and this technology becomes even more accessible for the general public, on top of video game companies, and the databases that create AI voices becomes even larger, then we have another privacy concern to be worried about on top of facial deepfakes as well. That's kind of the thing I want to leave off with, is what regulations do exist? Are there any that truthfully help right now with how fast the technology is developing? And kind of a few examples to kind of get people thinking, I guess. I would love to hear what you all have to say if you've made it to this part of the video. Let me know if I got any of my facts incorrect. I'm extremely passionate about this topic, not only because it includes Fortnite in it, but because it also kind of tackles that ethical morality of using AI to drive forward the gaming industry in a way that innovates video games, and that's kind of what Fortnite is doing. So obviously we can expect to see something like this done more so in the future. And I would like to keep the conversation going. I mean, I'm obviously very passionate about both Fortnite and the use of AI, so I would for sure love to keep this conversation going. And yes, as a side note, I would like to also mention that this entire video has been voice acted by an AI. I'm actually kidding, it's not. Anyways.
Fortnite, thank you! Thank you, Fortnite!